The walls of Constantinople had stood for over 1,000 years, but in May of 1453, stone by stone, they began to collapse. Imagine it, thunder that wasn't thunder, but Ottoman cannons hammering against the bones of a dying empire. You are inside the city, the smoke of shattered homes choking the air, the ground trembling beneath your feet. The screams aren't distant anymore, they're at your door. And as you hold your child, you realize something horrific: death would have been mercy. Because the Ottomans had perfected something far worse than killing. They had perfected conquest of the soul. This was not chaos. This was not the frenzy of war. This was a system. A policy. An ancient machine of domination that the empire had engineered with ruthless precision. When an Ottoman army seized a city, their soldiers didn't just storm through streets taking what they pleased. They followed manuals. Written protocols. Bureaucratic instructions on how to dismantle not just armies, but families, cultures, and identities. The body could resist a blade. But the mind? The heart? That was where true conquest lived. The chronicles of Constantinople describe horrors that read like nightmares. Families dragged into public squares. Fathers lined up and executed in cold order, boys as young as 6 slaughtered if they looked capable of defiance. But the men were not the true focus. No, the empire reserved something far more devastating for the women. It was called population processing. A phrase that sounds clinical, harmless even, until you understand what it really meant: reducing human beings into categories of value, as if they were cattle to be sorted, branded, and owned. The conquerors divided women by age, by beauty, by usefulness. 14 to 25, the prime group. They were tagged, numbered, and recorded into Ottoman ledgers, their worth estimated like livestock in a market. Older women were stripped of dignity and forced into labor, or simply executed. Children, your children, were not spared. Boys taken to be remade into soldiers who would one day kill their own people. Girls sent into formation programs, shaped to serve the empire's most secretive hierarchies. And all of it done under the eyes of the survivors, so the pain would echo through generations. This wasn't war. This was psychological engineering. A deliberate weaponization of the most intimate bonds between husbands and wives, mothers and children. The Ottomans knew something the rest of the world ignored: break the family, and you break the future. They taught themselves to be efficient in ruin. After the initial seizure, the empire's officers became cartographers of human worth, mapping who could be repurposed, who could be erased, and who could be converted into instruments of future power. Cities were catalogued like supply depots. Churches and schools stood as evidence of a culture's heart. By dismantling them piece by piece, the Ottomans dismantled memory itself. And memory, as you know now, is the most dangerous thing for conquerors to leave. Watch how this works: take a town, break its leaders, remove its men, and then take its women. Not randomly, not in fury, but in choreography designed to extract obedience. The women, wives of fallen warriors, mothers, daughters, were not simply deprived of freedom. Their roles were stolen and rewritten. Where a husband once defined a woman's place in society, the empire reassigned that identity, grafting on new names, new religions, new loyalties. Children born from such unions carried those changes like a living ledger that erased the old account. These were not isolated crimes. Ottoman legal codes, posse orders, and logistical ledgers show a pattern repeated across continents. Each iteration refined the machine: faster deportations, stricter record-keeping, specialized units to process populations quickly. The empire used language and law to sanitize brutality, terms like collection, settlement, rehabilitation. Words matter. Language shapes cruelty into policy. A bureaucrat's pen can make atrocity feel like administration. But the true mastery lay in creating dependence. The conquered were offered crumbs of stability, roof, permission to work, sanctioned marriage, on the condition of public submission and private compliance. Those who accepted these scraps were branded with a new identity: collaborator, survivor, ancestor of a changed order. Resistance became personal, because to resist was to deny one's children food, to threaten the fragile safety carved from ruins. Survival itself became a shackle. This is the psychological weapon they wielded, a slow corrosion of loyalty that feels like survival. No single battle accomplishes it. It is the steady application of policy and ritual, the slow rewriting of what a man believes about his wife, his sons, his bloodline. The past becomes a foreign country, and when memory is a foreign country, you can be governed like a subject without ever raising a sword. They practiced rituals too, subtle ceremonies that normalized the new order: marriage pronounced in a conquered tongue, child baptized in a borrowed faith, public festivals that celebrated a stolen peace. These small, relentless rituals closed the wound with a stitch that suffocated rebellion. Do you see it now? Conquest was never about the battlefield, it was about the aftermath. The sword only opened the door. What came next was the true invasion, the invasion of the mind, the invasion of the bloodline. When a warrior fell, his wife was not left free, nor allowed the dignity of grief. She was turned into a living symbol, her body, her identity, her very existence transformed into an Ottoman message carved into flesh: this is what happens when you defy us. The wives of defeated men were stripped not just of protection, but of belonging. The conquerors calculated every step of their humiliation. Forced into public squares, catalogued under watchful eyes, they were displayed as spoils, each one a reminder to those who still breathed that no sanctuary remained. For the empire, these women were not merely captives. They were weapons. A man could accept losing his home. He could accept chains on his wrists. But to know that his wife, his daughters, his bloodline itself had been rewritten into the script of his enemy? That broke something far deeper than a fortress wall. And this was by design. Ottoman administrators knew that the human spirit does not die in one blow. It dies in stages. Break the man on the battlefield. Break his sons in the execution pits. Then take his wife, not to kill her, but to reforge her into a vessel of the empire's will. Her children, born under foreign banners, raised with foreign tongues, would no longer remember their father's sacrifice. They would remember only the shadow of the new order. This was generational warfare, slavery not of the body alone, but of the bloodline itself. Think about it. How do you kill a culture without fire, without steel? You contaminate its inheritance. You poison its memory. And you do it so thoroughly, so systematically, that the people begin to believe the lie that survival itself requires obedience. This is why Ottoman conquest endured. Not because of their armies alone, but because they rewrote entire civilizations from the inside out. This is the truth no one dares speak: the wives of defeated warriors weren't just victims. They were turned into battlegrounds, where the war never ended, where the struggle for identity, for loyalty, for blood itself was fought long after the cannons fell silent. Now we descend deeper. You've seen how the empire weaponized families, how wives became symbols of submission and sons were harvested into soldiers. But here is the truth most men cannot bear to face: the Ottomans did not only dominate the body, they engineered the mind to love its chains. Survivors of conquest often spoke of something worse than violence: the confusion of the heart. Imagine watching your child being raised under the banners of your conqueror, chanting prayers in a tongue that is not your own, wearing garments dyed in your enemy's colors. At first, it fills you with rage. But rage is unsustainable. Rage burns a man alive from the inside. The Ottomans knew this. They knew that given time, grief would twist into something more useful: acceptance. And from acceptance, loyalty could be manufactured. This was psychological warfare disguised as mercy. They offered protection to widows, on the condition that they remarried within the system. They offered education to children, so long as it was Ottoman education. They offered faith, but only faith sanctioned by the Sultan's hand. Every act of survival was framed as gratitude. Gratitude for what? For being allowed to live, for being spared the blade. And slowly, survivors began to internalize the lie, we are lucky to serve. The manipulation was generational. One man may whisper rebellion in secret, but his son, taken as a boy, trained in Ottoman camps, converted, hardened, and reshaped, would become the hand that silenced his own father. And the wife, his mother, forced to watch her bloodline defend the very power that destroyed it, would learn the cruelest truth of all, her survival was used against her. Do you understand the brilliance of it? By turning survival into submission, they created self-policing populations. Resistance was no longer crushed from the outside, it was extinguished from within. A man didn't need a soldier watching over his shoulder, he had his own children, his own wife, his own community to remind him of the cost of defiance. And here's where you, the listener, must awaken. History tells us this system belonged to the Ottomans, but look around you. How many institutions still operate with this same principle? How often is survival framed as gratitude? How often is obedience disguised as protection? The mechanisms may have changed, but the pattern has not. Now listen carefully. To break free from manipulation, you must mark yourself as untouchable. Halfway through this descent, I want you to type these words twice in the comments to seal it in your mind, my bloodline is mine. Write it twice. Anchor it. Burn it into your identity. Because only by declaring ownership of your past can you protect your future. The deeper we go, the clearer it becomes, what the Ottomans built was not just an empire of stone and steel, but a blueprint for domination that rulers across history would copy. The conquest of Constantinople wasn't an isolated event, it was a prototype. Every decision, every policy, every ritualized humiliation was studied, refined, and replicated. And you've been taught to think of it as history, locked safely in the past. But the past is never locked. It echoes. It mutates. It survives in systems around you right now. Consider this, the idea of population processing did not die with the Sultan's scribes. It resurfaced in colonial empires, in the boarding schools that stripped native children of their languages, in the concentration camps that separated families with bureaucratic efficiency, in the refugee protocols that reduce lives into ledgers and quotas. The names change. The uniforms change. The language shifts from Turkish to English, from Arabic to German, from Latin to the jargon of modern governance. But the machinery is the same. Divide. Categorize. Assimilate. Erase. The Ottomans knew something brutal about human nature. If you want to control a people, don't just break their armies, break their inheritance. Replace fathers with execution pits. Replace husbands with foreign overseers. Replace mothers with symbols of defeat. Replace children's tongues with the language of empire. Do this long enough, and the people themselves will begin to carry out the program willingly. They will police each other. They will raise their children in obedience to your laws. They will defend the very system that enslaves them. And isn't that what we see now? Look at the institutions around you. Families fractured, traditions rewritten, identities commodified. You're told it's progress. You're told it's modernization. But peel back the mask, and you see the same Ottoman logic: control the bloodline, and you control the man. The battlefield is no longer the city wall or the fortress gate, it is your household, your school, your very memory. The wives of fallen warriors knew this horror firsthand. Their bodies were used to breed loyalty to a foreign order. Their children were shaped into tools that erased their own ancestry. Their grief was weaponized into silence. And this is why their suffering was worse than death, because death ends. This did not. It continued in every heartbeat, every child born into bondage, every whispered lullaby in a language that no longer belonged to them. This is not just history. It is a warning. And once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. They removed the proof. Not with a single pyre or dramatic purge, but through 1,000 small acts of translation, mislabeling, and omission invisible to most readers. When a conqueror secures a city, the spoils are not only gold, they are ledgers, marriage contracts, birth registers, private letters, religious books. The empire did not merely seize goods, it seized memory. Surviving documents were refiled under Ottoman categories, their meaning blurred by official procedure. Historians, for all their claimed objectivity, are human. Incentives shape narratives. A scholar dependent on patronage, on access to state libraries, on permissions to quote certain sources, learns what to emphasize and what to leave cold. Official archives were selectively opened. Privilege granted to researchers who framed conquest as progress, who translated reports to favor the state's version. Who pays for published history matters. Language is a quiet assassin of truth. Records in Greek, Arabic, Armenian, Syriac, Latin, each a sealed vault unless someone cares enough to translate them faithfully. Translation is not neutral. A single mistranslation reshapes a story. Words like processing can be rendered clinical or euphemistic. Over centuries, pleas from wives, their petitions, illegal marriages, quiet resistances, were smoothed into acceptances or lost entirely. Institutions contributed to the amnesia. Museums displayed trophies but labeled them cultural exchange. Curricula taught battles and treaties but skipped aftermaths, no time for grief. National mythmakers dropped inconvenient chapters to stitch a founding story. The men who wrote schoolbooks had motives, stability, identity, tourism. In doing so, they performed public forgetting. The erasure took subtler forms too, forged lineages, official pardons, rewards to collaborators, legal definitions that reclassified victims as subjects. Religious authorities sometimes negotiated compromises that silenced testimony in exchange for protection. Even oral histories were reshaped by the practical need to survive, stories shortened, names omitted, wounds wrapped in acceptable metaphors. For centuries these small violences accumulated until the true shape of events was unrecognizable. Forgetting is rarely accidental. It is deliberate, distributed, lawful. And when a culture forgets the mechanisms of its own subjugation, it becomes vulnerable to repeating them. This is why we must pry open archives, read between bureaucratic lines, and listen to voices history tried to silence. Seek out forgotten registers, learn local names, trace burial records, question comfortable narratives. Knowledge is a weapon in the hands of the vigilant now. Here is the truth you were never supposed to hear. What happened to the wives of defeated warriors under the Ottomans was not an aberration, it was a template. A manual of domination so effective, it has been echoed in every age since. The greatest secret is not that these horrors happened, it's that the logic behind them is still alive, wearing different clothes, speaking different languages, hidden in institutions you pass every day. Look at the mechanism: kill the men, take the women, reprogram the children. Break the family, rewrite the inheritance, seed loyalty into the womb itself. Do this, and you don't just win a battle, you erase an enemy from the inside. This is why the wives suffered a fate worse than death, because they were forced to live as vessels of the enemy's design, carrying children whose very existence erased their own past. Death ends pain. But this was a pain that reproduced itself generation after generation. And when history was rewritten, their voices vanished. You won't find their words in polished textbooks. You won't see their faces carved into marble monuments. Their cries were buried in archives, softened into bureaucratic terms, forgotten by design. Because if men like you remembered what was done, if you truly saw the machinery of conquest, you might begin to recognize the same machinery in your own world. Do you think it's gone? Look closer. Families fractured by policy. Traditions rebranded as obsolete. Children taught to despise the roots of their fathers. Survival offered, but only in exchange for obedience. You are told it's progress, modernization, necessity. But strip away the mask, and you will see the same logic, the same empire of the mind, that ruled Constantinople when the walls fell. This is why I speak to you not as a storyteller, but as a mentor pulling you into the shadows where the forbidden truths are kept. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you hear, you cannot return to silence. The wives of fallen warriors whisper across centuries, reminding you that survival without sovereignty is not life, it is captivity. Now you stand at a threshold. You have heard what was hidden. The question is whether you will walk away unchanged, or whether you will anchor it inside you. Men who know the truth must decide, remain a subject of systems, or claim mastery over your own bloodline. The choice is yours. But know this, the moment you awaken, you step into danger. And yet, only in danger does freedom live.